Hello, period 6. Nice to see you. I really like being here because I like talking to you about this because this is going to be your thing. You're going to have to deal with this for the rest of your lives, climate change. What I'm going to talk about is going to be things that are happening between now and 2100 nominally. And some of you may still be around in 2100. You'll be kind of old, but you may still be here. And if not you, your family, your children and grandchildren will be here. So it's going to be very important to you, and that's why I love educating you about it. So let's get started.
All right, people, let me tell you about global warming. Ha! It's a bunch of hooey. That's right, you heard me. I mean, this is America, right? You need your car, right? You need your AC, right? Lawn's gotta get mowed. And what about communing with nature?
Yeah, what about communing with nature on your ATV? I love it. It's crickets every time. I love that clip. I think it's hilarious. But the point is that that's sort of like what we are. As Americans, we like to do big stuff. We like to do it in a big way. And that's probably not going to change. We're going to keep being that way. But we may need to think about how we're going to do those sorts of things and what our energy source is going to be. And we're going to cover some of those things this afternoon. So the first thing I want to talk about before I really get into that is what's going to be happening in California in your lifetime between now and 2100. This agency in the California government got together and made up this list, and not surprisingly, the first thing on their list is extreme heat. It's probably going to continue to get warmer for the foreseeable future, and there's not a whole heck of a lot we can do about it. So extreme heat is probably going to be in your future. Part of that heat is going into the ocean, and it's affecting sea life. They just can't adapt fast enough to the increases in temperature in the ocean. Another thing that's going to affect sea life is ocean acidification. And we're going to talk about carbon dioxide more later, but carbon dioxide goes into both the air and the ocean. And when it goes into the ocean, it makes the ocean more acidic. And that's a problem for some sea life, especially the little critters that grow shells. So ocean acidification is a problem. As I said, the ocean is warming, and that's causing sea level rise because water, as it warms, expands. And we also have a lot of ice melting all around the world, which is going to affect sea levels as well. As a coastal state, we're going to need to worry about that. Water. Water is a big deal in California, especially here in Southern California, because this is essentially a desert that we have converted into a place for us to live. And that's okay, but we really need to think about managing our water. And part of managing our water is managing agriculture as well, because agriculture takes a lot of water, and we have to balance those needs, the needs of the people and the animals and the needs of agriculture. Glaciers are another part of the water system. These glaciers store water, and they're going away. They're not going to be around. So it's going to be important to take that into account when we're dealing with all the other water issues we have. And last but not least, we have fire. More wildfires are going to be happening as things dry out and get warmer. So we need to worry about wildfires as well. And speaking about heat, let's talk a little bit about heat waves. We do have some heat waves in Southern California. We've had a pretty nice summer this year, but it does get warm occasionally, up in the hundreds, and that's pretty interesting. Out on the East Coast last year, February of 2018, for some reason it got exceptionally hot out there in February. It's supposed to be cold and wintry in February, but it wasn't. It was really extra warm, and everybody was excited about that. Also this year, the Midwest and the East Coast had high temperatures and high humidity, which made it extra miserable out there in that part of the country. And that was interesting too. I mean, it doesn't happen that often. Some states are still suffering a little bit from that. It's still warm and muggy. So this is all interesting stuff, and we like talking about it, but this is weather. It's not climate. Weather is what's happening today, this week, this month, even this year. But climate is the bigger picture. That's what I'm going to try to show you here. This chart shows temperature data from 1850 to the present, and you can see temperatures range all over the map. They're up, down, all over the place. It's really difficult to predict what's going to happen. But I think you can see, if you start right about here at 1930, that even though the temperatures vary a lot, the trend during this time period is pretty flat. The trend is pretty flat. And then things change at around 1930, and it starts trending warmer. And even though there was a bit of a flat spot here, the basic trend since 1930 has been warmer temperatures. That trend is the climate trend that we're worried about. Water resources. Water, as I said, is a big deal here. We had a drought. Lake Shasta was down in 2014. It was up significantly in 2016. Right now it's at 82%. Lake Oroville 2014, almost empty. Lake Oroville 2017, pretty much overflowing. It's at 77% now. Our Lake Casitas is only about 43% full. So it's not doing the best. And it's been hovering in that vicinity for quite a while. So this is a concern, and like I said, Southern California has a serious water issue, and we need to monitor that. Part of the water situation is snowpack, and this chart really just shows that, like temperature, it's all over the place. It's up, down, various years. There's probably not much predicting it, except here during the drought, when it really significantly went down to pretty much nothing in 2015. But snowpack has changed. This is a bit of a wonky chart, but this is the average snowpack. And here we are, these last few years, we're doing better than average, so we're doing pretty good on snowpack now. This red line was snowpack during the drought, 2014 and 15. So we're doing better on snowpack, and that's important because snowpack is used by farmers to help get their crops going in the spring. It comes down off the mountains, and that's what they use. So it's important. I'm going to run through the drought really quickly. This is back in 2015 when almost half of the state was in the most serious drought condition possible, exceptional drought. That's what all this dark brown area is. Then it got better. Took a while. October 2017, we'd had some rain, even though here in Ventura County, we're still in a moderate drought condition. Then it got worse again. Things dried out August 2018, and this is important because during this time, we were having a lot of fires. We had fires going from Tijuana, San Diego, all the way up into Canada, wildfires all over the place. So that was partially due, I'm sure, to the fact that we were dry and in a drought condition. This is the drought monitor map now. We're doing really well. A little bit of residual drought from Arizona, which is having a pretty serious drought at the moment. So we're doing pretty well, but that's no excuse to use extra water, continue to conserve. What other things can we think about? Extinctions. A quarter to a third of all plants and animals are subject to extinction just because of the heat. Tropical diseases could move north, and they probably will as things warm up, which it will do. And pollen could increase because carbon dioxide is sort of a fertilizer for plants. And with extra carbon dioxide, they'll grow a little better and may grow more pollen. So all of these things are happening. We have heat waves, we have droughts, we have extreme weather, which we'll talk about later. We have tropical diseases. So the big question is, so what? What's the big deal? And I've heard this a lot over the years when I've been talking about climate change. Well, this is what convinced me that there was something serious going on. I've got two charts, 400,000 years of Earth history. This data actually goes back 1 million years, but 400,000 will do it for our purposes. What we have here is 200,000 years. The black line is carbon, and the red line is Earth temperature. And you can see they track pretty closely most of the time during this 200,000 years. So what do you think this is? As we start to cool off and go down to the bottom here, an ice age. And then we have a warm period. Ice age, warm period. Most of the time during this 200,000 years, it's cool or ice age conditions. Only occasionally do we have an interglacial between glaciers event where it warms up. Now, how do we know all this? We know it from ice core research, where scientists bring up cylindrical samples of ice from Antarctica and Greenland and other places, and the further down you go, the further back in time you go. And there's air trapped in this old ice, and they can analyze that air and figure out what the Earth was like at that period of time. So let's go to the next 200,000 years. We have another ice age here, another interglacial, kind of a long one. Then we cool off, go down to another ice age, and then interglacial. Here we are today, warm period. It's supposed to be warm. It is warm. So what's the big deal? Well, if you've been paying attention, and I know you have noticed that the black line, carbon dioxide, never got above 290 parts per million. The whole million years back when we have this data for, it never got above 290. Doesn't matter what happened, earthquakes, volcanoes, sunspots, all that stuff, doesn't matter. Never got above 290. So what are we doing now at 409? Well, the only explanation is that we did that. Human beings. There's no other way to explain it happening that quickly. Now, if we're lucky, or I should say, if you're lucky, maybe we'll be able to roll it off to around 450 parts per million and kind of stabilize the climate, maybe start moving in the other direction at some point. But it's likely, the way we're going, that you guys will see 750 parts per million or more between now and 2100. It's going to be a very different planet if that happens. And it's definitely not consistent with what's happened for the last 1 million years. So that's not to say that it hasn't been warm on Earth before. It has been. We're over here in this area right here, but 50 million years ago, there was a peak up here where it was 12 degrees centigrade warmer on average than it is right now. But this whole event, where it warmed up, peaked, and cooled down a little bit, that's 10 million years. And see that little spike there? The PETM? It went up to 12 then too. Looks like just a little tiny spike, really short, right? 200,000 years. So what we've done in about 150 years. There's no comparison. There's really no way of knowing what's going to happen, and that's what's got a lot of people worried. So these are the greenhouse gases: carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, a couple of refrigerants, an industrial gas, and water vapor. Water vapor is a greenhouse gas. And as the atmosphere warms, more water vapor goes into the atmosphere, and it warms more and more water vapor, so it's a feedback loop that we don't need, but it's happening every day. And all this is important because of the greenhouse effect, where we have molecules bouncing around. Here's a water. This is carbon dioxide. That's a methane right there. The CFC. All those are bouncing around up in the atmosphere. And the sun shines, of course, on the planet, and some of that sunlight, some of that energy goes out into space, but some of it strikes the planet. At the same time, the Earth emits energy, and some of that goes out into space, but some of it bounces back. And that's what we're worried about, the bounce that we're getting with the extra greenhouse gases. The more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, the more bounce we get, and then more energy and heat stays in the system. And that energy needs to go somewhere. It's not just going to sit idle, which is why it's partially responsible for things like this, where in Houston, there was an interchange with, I think, a little concrete river here one day, and then 2 days later, it's full of water up to that middle bridge. Extreme weather. We're not necessarily having more storms, we're having more extreme storms. I'm going to concentrate on these greenhouse gases because they're connected to fuel combustion. And we use fuel combustion, or fossil fuels, for all kinds of things. We use it to make electricity, we use it to fuel our vehicles, we use it to heat and light buildings. Fossil fuels are a major part of our society. And it's really important that we start thinking about how we're going to control these fossil fuel emissions. And one of the ways I'm going to make the point about this is to show you this video about 3 numbers. 3 numbers are kind of important. The first number is 2 degrees Celsius. Now, 2 degrees is important because all the countries in the world got together 10 years ago and decided, okay, we don't want it to get any warmer than 2 degrees centigrade, period. That's as warm as we want it to get. So let's think about that for a minute. 2 degrees centigrade is about 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Suppose you had a 3.6 degree fever, which would be about 102. How would you feel? Pretty crappy. Pretty icky. You mean you wouldn't be in the hospital necessarily, but you'd be pretty sick. And that's kind of an analogy for what the Earth would be like if we got up to 2 degrees. It wouldn't be deadly, but it would be different, and it would be sick. I mean, it doesn't sound like a lot. 2 degrees centigrade doesn't sound like a lot, but it can be a lot for us, and it can be a lot for the Earth. So let's assume that 2 degrees is it. Actually, that's maybe a little high, but if we're going to keep under 2 degrees, there's only so much carbon we can use, and we can calculate that. And the amount of carbon we can afford to lose total is 565 gigatons, which is a lot of carbon. And we're putting more carbon out every day, doing our best to maybe try to limit it a little bit, but not being too successful. So they're saying we're going to get to 565 in 15 years. This was made a few years ago. So it's about 2027 to 2030, right around that range. That's when we'll get to 565. So the third number is the amount of carbon that oil companies and coal companies and governments and other businesses have in their reserves that they want to sell us. They want to make money on this stuff that's in their reserves. They want to bring it out of the ground and sell it to us. How much is in the reserves? 2,795 gigatons. So the big question is, how are we going to keep 4/5 of this in the ground so it's never sold, never used? All these companies are going to be very upset. Well, the answer is we don't really have a good idea how that's going to go. But there's a couple of ideas that have been utilized recently. The first one is divest from fossil fuels. What that means is entities like pension plans and big investors take their money out of the fossil fuel industry rather than investing, which is putting money in. Divesting is taking money out. So that could be a way to go. I mean, money talks, and if you remove money from the system, it could affect how they do business. Another way to go, or a possibility, is a carbon fee. This has been talked about a lot over the years. This particular proposal, the carbon fee would be put on at the source, wherever the coal or natural gas or gasoline comes from originally, and then you all of us would get a check from the government, the dividend, to help pay for that increase in cost. So it's supposed to be relatively fair to everyone. It hasn't been getting a whole lot of traction, but it is a possibility of a way to go. But one thing we know for sure, we are definitely moving from the fossil fuel era to the sustainable energy era. We're getting there. It's just a matter of how quickly we get there. So what do you think our initial fuel system was, energy system? I submit that it was wood. When we first discovered fire, we burned wood. And then we realized that coal and oil and other things had more energy content per square size, and they burned fossil fuels. Now we're done with that. We're going away from that and going into sustainable energy. How are we going to get there? Well, we could use some help from the federal government, but no administration, Republican or Democrat, has done enough about climate change. They've all been ignoring it since the 1960s, when I was a teenager, when I was your age. So it's been a long time. A couple of years ago, we had all of these people denying the existence of climate change, 182 members of the House of Representatives and the Senate. So we had an election recently, and a lot of people were pretty happy about it, but we still have 150 people that are denying climate change. So even though that's an improvement, it's not getting us anywhere. So things need to change.
In case we have forgotten, because we keep hearing that 2014 has been the warmest year on record, I asked the chair, you know what this is? It's a snowball. And that's just from outside here. So it's very, very cold out, very unseasonal. So here, Mr. President, catch this.
So that's a U.S. senator pretending not to know the difference between climate and weather. It's hard to know exactly what he really thinks, but that's sort of what we're dealing with at the federal level. Fortunately, at the state level, here in California, in 2006, we had the Global Warming Solutions Act. Has anybody ever heard of it? Yeah. It was called AB 32 at the time. So the idea was to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions to the same level as 1990 by the end of 2020. And guess what? We did it. In fact, we did it early. Right around 2016, we made our target of 431, we made it down to 429, which is still a lot of carbon, 429 million metric tons. Yikes. But the good thing is we showed we could do it. It could be done, and other states are doing it, and other countries around the world are doing similar things. When this first came out, there was some stuff that they wanted to do right away. not wait till 2020. So this was one of the things, and that was to make long-haul trucks more efficient. Smart way truck efficiency, where they would make long-haul trucks move through the air, make them more aerodynamic. They would put side panels on, put roof fairings on, aerodynamic mirrors, put these panels on the back of the trailer to help move the air around the trailer. And this all worked. I mean, it makes the truck more aerodynamic. And if it's more efficient, it uses less fuel and makes fewer greenhouse gas emissions. And it saves money. So it's a win all the way around. Kind of the same thing for this, the tire inflation program, where you make sure that the tires on your car are properly inflated. It wasn't just us, all of the mechanics out there were supposed to help with this also. So it's a basic thing though. An underinflated tire is less efficient, you use more gas. Keep them properly inflated, you use less gas, you're more efficient, make fewer greenhouse gas emissions. It's something we all can do. Local activity, there's quite a bit going on. Solar is going in a lot of places. This is the fairgrounds, this is Thousand Oaks, that's the Ventura City Yard. The government center, they put a lot of solar in one of their parking lots. Water conservation is still big. As I said, we need to worry about water and where we're going to get it. So most of the cities have conservation programs. Here in Ventura, they have a washing machine rebate. I was pretty fascinated by that. Plumbing and fixture and turf and irrigation. Most of the cities have things like this. And it's all important to reduce our water intake. Public transportation. Anybody here use public transportation regularly? Like every day or so? We have a couple, 2 or 3. I'll admit that I don't use it that much, but it's something that's important to do, because combining trips with other people in a bus or a public transit system reduces fuel use and it saves greenhouse gas emissions. It's that important and it's that easy. So all of these systems that are available to us are important to use. Technology. I'm an engineer, I like technology. The first thing I'm going to talk about is ocean power. We might actually see some of this here since we're near the ocean. This is one idea. These cylinders float in the ocean and they're hinged, and as they move with the waves, the hinges go back and forth and they generate power at those hinges. Here's another idea. The central mechanism fastens to the ocean floor, and then the floats move up and down with the waves and generate electricity. And here's a third totally different system where this is built on shore, and waves come in, go into the structure and create air pressure. And that compressed air is then used to turn a turbine and generate electricity. Compressed air to make electricity. All of these things are possible. The thing about doing stuff in the ocean is that the ocean is very unforgiving and it likes to tear things up. So anything we put in the ocean needs to be really strong. Alternative vehicles. You guys are all too young to remember the EV1. This came out in the mid-90s. That's actually me. I got to drive one for a while when I was working at the Air District. It was a fun car. It was pretty quick, 2-seater, sporty, but it would only drive about 30 miles and you had to charge it up again. So it wasn't really all that practical. But we have better electric vehicles now. We have the Ford Focus, the Nissan Leaf is getting better all the time. The Chevy Bolt with a B, and of course the Tesla Model 3. All of these electric cars will go for about 225 to 250 miles on a charge. Maybe some of the Teslas will go a little bit longer. But That's okay, and that's pretty good. It's not really enough for some of us to do any long-haul traveling. Now, this is a possibility. Now, this is going to be expensive, but Tesla's coming out with a new Roadster in 2020. Aside from going 250 miles an hour, which is both scary and intriguing, it's supposed to have 620 miles of range, so that you can drive 620 miles on one charge. That's pretty outstanding. And if they can actually make this work, get those batteries in this tiny car, I'll be impressed. So that's what we need for electric vehicles, is better batteries. So those scientists out here in the audience, that's what you can work on, better battery technology. I think the best alternative we have at the moment is hybrid vehicles. And that's a hybrid vehicle. It's a 1916 Owen magnetic, so it's over 100 years old. But it has a gas engine and a gas tank and an electric motor and a battery, just like all the hybrids today have. Now, I don't know that it worked all that well, but it existed over 100 years ago, which is pretty outstanding. Of course, we have better hybrids now. These are all plug-in hybrids, where you can drive for a certain amount of distance on the battery alone, and then you switch over to gasoline. On this slide, this is the best one, the Honda. You can go 47 miles on the battery. I'm lucky to have a Chevy Volt with a V. I can go 60 miles on the battery, so I can drive most places in Ventura County on the battery alone and never use any gas, which is great. If I have to go on a long trip, I can use a little gas. But I don't have to use gas most days. But I think what you guys are going to see are fuel cell vehicles, which are electric vehicles that make the electricity inside the car. But it's not free. You can't get free energy. You need something to make that electricity. What is that? Hydrogen. So where do you buy hydrogen? Well, there are some places around where you can buy hydrogen for your fuel cell vehicle, and there are some out there. But there are not that many. There are a lot more electric charging stations than fuel cell stations. But this could improve, and one thing about fuel cell vehicles that I like is that these hydrogen tanks will fill up in about 5 minutes. It's a lot quicker than charging the battery on your electric vehicle, which even under the best circumstances, with a Tesla supercharger, takes about 20 to 30 minutes. So there's advantages here. And if we get the infrastructure, I think you guys might be driving fuel cell vehicles in the future. Solar power, I love solar power. This is Limonera in Santa Paula, with the packing houses there in the background. This is another solar power system where we have mirrors shining sunlight to a central location here, and that central location gets really hot. And then they use that heat to make steam, and then the steam to make electricity. We use steam to make electricity now, except we use fossil fuels to heat the water, and sometimes nuclear energy. In this case, we use the sun to heat the water. So no fossil fuels and no nuclear. And there actually exists. These exist around the world. These are out on I-15 as you're going to Las Vegas. You can see them out there working. This shot is from the highway. So there's 3 of them. I mean, take a look for them when you're going to Vegas next time. Solar for your house. I know you don't have a lot of control over this, but it's something to bring up to your family, especially if you have a big family. You can save a lot of energy with solar panels. And wind power. Wind power is huge in the Midwest. This is Kansas. There's probably 100 wind turbines in this picture, if you counted them all up. And it's amazing how many wind turbines are out there. And we kind of started this wind turbine thing here in California out in Tehachapi, they had wind turbines. They were probably around this size range, maybe this size range. But now they've gotten totally huge. Here's a picture of a couple of guys doing a little work on a wind turbine. And I really like this picture because here's the service island right here for this wind turbine system. There's another one up there too. But it shows you by comparison how big these wind turbines are. They are really huge. And this is interesting because it's California. This happened August 28th. Actually, maybe it's 27th. Got it wrong. Anyway, this happened in California. It was a day in California. And this green line is renewable energy. So look what happens at about 7 in the morning. It starts ramping up. That's solar. That green bump is solar energy. That didn't exist 5 years ago. It wasn't around. So during the day, every day, we're using a lot of solar energy. And that bubble, that peak is just going to keep going up and up and up. Here we used quite a bit of natural gas this day because it must have been warm, using a lot of air conditioning. But this bubble for solar is huge, and it's going to be becoming even huger in the future. And there's a lot of jobs in solar and wind. Almost 375,000 jobs in solar, 100,000 in wind. A lot of opportunity to make money and have jobs in the renewable energy industry. So what can we do to make the biggest impression? You probably don't have much control over this, but I think what we can do most significantly is drive a more efficient vehicle. Because the less gas you use, the fewer greenhouse gas emissions you make. And in the United States, we're pretty lousy on fuel efficiency. All these other countries are doing better than we are. And it's probably because we drive bigger vehicles than they do on average. And like I said earlier, that's probably not going to change, but we need to do it in a little bit different way. And I still like talking about LEDs. I hope you're all using LED light bulbs. Vampire power, what's this? It's the power that your electronics are using when they're supposed to be off, when the little red light is on. That means it's still sucking power, but you're not doing anything. So if you can, unplug stuff like that. Sometimes that's not practical, but you can put it on a power strip and turn it off that way also. And this is especially important for chargers, because we all have lots of chargers for our devices, phones, tablets, laptops. Unplug them or put them on a power strip and turn them off when you're not using them, because they still use power even when you're not charging. So, and you can measure all that stuff too with a meter if you're an engineer and you like to do that stuff. So what can you expect? Warmer temperatures? Certainly. Less water? Probably. Higher water prices, more expensive food, more forest fires, no lawn, turf replacement, fuel cell vehicles, more alternate transportation. This is really important because a lot of it depends on how we design our cities and living areas, but to make this easier, but walking, riding a bicycle, mass transit, carpooling, that's all important to reducing greenhouse gases. Because gasoline will be going out of style and it'll get more expensive because we'll be using renewable electric energy. So we've got all this to look forward to, so what can you do? Here's an idea.
Simply stated, we are here because we are at risk.
We believe that what we have to say matters, and so we urge you to take action and become a leading city in developing a climate action plan that starts from what is scientifically necessary to preserve our future and not from what many may think is politically possible.
And the time is now to come together as a united force to ensure a livable future for us, for your children, for your grandchildren, and for the generations to come. The time is now to create a sustainable future.
iMatter actually started here in Ventura, so there may actually be a chapter nearby. There may be one here, but it's something you can do to get involved. Another thing that happened a few years ago was that a couple of dozen kids got together and they sued the federal government in federal court because the leaders we have elected to take care of our planet are failing to do their job. Suing the federal government is kind of daunting, but it's one thing that you could do. And I also wanted to talk about Greta. You guys have heard about Greta, right? She was the climate strike girl. This is how she started out. She sat by herself against the wall of the Swedish parliament with a sign, "School Strike for Climate." That was her 3 years ago. Here she is today.
This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
So she's changed a lot in 3 years. And you don't have to be internationally famous to make a difference. You can do the same thing in your own way. Because your generation, the post-millennial generation, Generation Green New Deal, you guys are a big generation. You can do a lot. And so I encourage you to get out there and talk to whoever will listen, your parents, grandparents, brothers and sisters. Do more research. I've just scratched the surface here today. Do more research on climate change and get out there, talk about it, because you have a lot of power. And I hope you use it. Thank you very much. That's my show. Thanks for being here.